Welcome to Globespan 24/7 as we bring you our Monday night program from New York, Guyana, broadcast around the world. We want to thank you, our audience, for joining on tonight. And we want to thank Nohar Singh for making this platform available. And of course, Devin Bisu, our technical specialist. Tonight, we will be having our final program for 2022. We hope that we have been of great company with you guys. I know sometimes we got the other end of the stick with some of your comments, but that is all part of the equation. But to wrap up tonight, for 2022 is no stranger to us. He has been a registrar at the university, a bursar at the University of Guyana. He has also been a commissioner for many, many years at the Guyana Elections Commission. Mr. Alexander, welcome to the program tonight.
Thank you very much.
And with me, of course, my co-host, Dr. Rose, welcome.
Thank you, Charles, and welcome, Mr. Alexander. You are on the pulse of the nation, Globespan Television.
Thank you. Mr. Alexander, how many years were you, well, are you still a commissioner of GCOM?
I joined the commission in 2007. That gives me 15 years.
15 years. In those 15 years, why as a commissioner, why do we still have elections that one side or the other, they think it's compromise? Has the commission failed in its work to deliver a great service to the people of Guyana?
Well, I would say that one has to see the commission as a microcosm of the Guyanese society. And so the same way in which the society is divided and fractured, like manner, the commission is divided and fractured. But I would hasten to say that has gotten worse in recent times. There were times when the commission was more like a commission than it is today.
And you have been 50 years a commissioner. You have actually straddled many chairmen and now a chairwoman. Without compromising anyone's position, in your view, who ran the best commission at GCOM?
Undoubtedly, Suresbali during my time as a member.
Did he leave on his own accord, or was he forced to leave?
I think he was pressured out. After the 2015 elections, I think Suresbali was pressured out of the commission.
Is the position of chairman of the Elections Commission a time-centered position that within certain years you can only serve so many terms or years?
None of the commissioners are subject to a time frame or a term.
Which include the chairman?
Which includes the chairperson.
So there was no reason for Dr. Suresbali to leave if he didn't want to?
You're quite correct.
Okay. And I think there are many reasons that a lot of people talk about different reasons why he had to leave. And I believe after he left, so after he left, Mr. Alexander, did the commission start deteriorate, or is it before his leaving?
I would say it went downhill after he left. Suresbali brought some degree of stability in some regards by the manner in which he sought to conduct the affairs of the commission as chairperson.
You also worked under different CEOs as commissioner. In your view, who was the most outstanding CEO?
That's a rather interesting question. Undoubtedly, Boudou and Lowenfield, they both knew their job.
Who was the first one?
Boudou and Lowenfield, they both knew their job. I cannot put Boudou ahead of Lowenfield for the simple reason that though he knew his job, he, in my you misused that knowledge to try to favor, if not rig, the elections.
And that comes to my next question, Mr. Lowenfield, Mr. Alexander. It appears as though Mr. Boodoo being of an Indian origin and Mr. Lowenfield being of African origin, are they kind of somehow have some softer feeling for the party that look like them? When I mean that, I mean like Mr. Boodoo, the PEP, and Mr. Lowenfield, the PNC. Is that some soft spot they have for these parties, and that prevented them from being independent?
Let me go back to my original comment that GCOM is a microcosm of the wider Guyanese society. I would say, however, that one could much easier associate Boodoo with the PPP than one could associate Lowenfield with the PNC.
But that
for example,
statement,
when Boodoo left GCOM, if I'm not mistaken, he became an advisor to the government. So he was taken into the bosom of the government when he left.
Yeah, but that's not a really yardstick to measure his loyalty to the PEP, because, and as you mentioned, I agree with you, I think Mr. Boodoo had a softer side for the PPP, and I know at one election, you call him out with a seat for the AFC, and he had to reverse that position, I believe, to give the AFC.
On one election, 2006, he actually gave a seat to the
he gave the seat, to the
Linden,
PPP. Yeah.
In Linden, to secure Sam Hines. That was a seat lawfully won by the AFC. So that's 2006. In 2011, he attempted to give a seat to the PPP. But I was able to identify.
And then you stepped in. Okay. Right. And those are things that in the view of most Guyanese, an independent GCOM will not want to do that. You gotta give, we have a democracy, and a democracy, the person or party with the most vote win whatever they have to win. And for a CEO to put himself into the position to dictate something other than what the electorate voted for, that is cause for concern. But having said that, Ms. Alexander, we saw in the 2020 election. Well, let me step back a little. When Dr. Serge Bali was the chairman of GCOM, there was a very good clip, and I know Devin has that clip, when him and Mr. Lowenfield, who was the CEO then, talks about how tight-knitted the system is within GCOM to prevent anyone other than the person who's listed to vote for that person to vote. It was very clear. But yet, we see in 2020, he pushed that all aside and still claimed he was throwing out 100,000 people who voted as not votes to be counted. Why did he do that?
Let me first of all say that even as Serge Bali and Lowenfield talked about a system that was perfect, even at that time, I was of the view that the human factor could have made a difference to the system. So that I was not at one with Serge Bali and Lowenfield on that question. I always felt that the system was vulnerable and the human factor could make a difference. And I argued that point not after 2020, long before 2020. On the question of what happened in 2020 and Lowenfield throwing out these votes, this occurred after the recount. A recount in which undoubtedly it was identified that they were fraudulent votes. And he did it at a time when the appeal court had pronounced on the question of valid votes, saying that valid votes should count. And he gave his interpretation to that, and that is what led to him doing what he did. Subsequently, the CCJ overruled that question of valid votes that was raised at the level of the appeal court. But I'd like to go on to say that he attempted to deal with an issue that ought to have been dealt with and has not ever been addressed by the commission or by anyone else. And that is, if you could not authenticate the votes in 47 boxes, votes amounting to about 14,000, then the solution had to be otherwise. I made a proposal at that time. It's documented. It can be found in the National Library in the archives, where I suggested that the elections in that area should have been subject to by-election, because the inability to authenticate 14,000 votes was a big problem. But at the same time, one could not nullify all of the votes just like that, because there must have been valid votes among those, although many could not be authenticated. And my view at that time, and still is, and it's on record, that what they should have done is to run a by-election in that area to ensure, not as Lowenfield sought to do, to disenfranchise people, because you couldn't identify specifically who were the individuals in the way he did what he did. And therefore he would have ended up disenfranchising people.
I know, Mr. Alexander, let's take it one step at a time, and you make a nice point there. But first thing I want to tell you is that if you had done a by-election, that would have been considered unconstitutional, because our constitution does not allow for by-election, does it?
That is not true. GCOM has certain powers.
No, but in the Representation of the People's Act, does it give GCOM the authority to do by-election outside of the general election?
It does not specify.
And that would be another court issue. But let's leave that aside. Let's leave it aside for now.
It may have been, but certainly would have been fair. And in my view, GCOM had the power to do a by-election.
Okay, let's leave it aside. Mr. Alexander, what is considered a valid vote? What is a valid vote?
A valid vote is a vote cast by someone who is authorized to vote, and a vote which can be authenticated in the process. Because at the end of the day, the presiding officer has a list, and that presiding officer crosses off the name of each and every person who turned up to vote. What turned out through the recount was that they were... Let's stop
there 1 second. That's good. I mean, so a valid vote is someone who's on the voters list who is registered to vote. That one we agree. Now, authentication of that vote, who determines authentication of the vote?
In the normal course of things, votes are simply counted on the assumption that they are valid, on the normal course of things. 2020.
Mr. Alexander, I'm sorry I'm cutting you. I'm sorry I'm cutting you off, but that's a very statement. It's on the assumption that it is valid. Isn't you mentioned earlier that the presiding officer have a list. This is the list the presiding officer has. And Charles Sugrim comes in and said, I am Charles Sugrim. This is my ID card, whatever you want. And maybe I signed to receive it. I don't know what the process is right now. And then you give me a ballot. Isn't that enough to authenticate as a valid vote?
Well, the extent to which the recount showed that there were persons who penetrated the system, the extent to which it suggests that the system is flawed, even as we rely on that ID card. And you should note that we do not only rely on ID cards.
Right.
Someone can not have an ID card and sign an affidavit indicating that he or she is the person named, and that person is allowed to vote on the basis of the affidavit. And I think that has occurred because of the machinations of the Esther Pereira case.
Is there, Mr. Alexander, is there a signature of each voter on that list that the presiding officer has?
There isn't.
Well, why don't you guys implement that?
Well, I wouldn't go for a signature. I would go for using a fingerprint.
No, I know. Listen, fingerprint is one, but over the years, I mean, you would have known here in the United States, and America has been a republic 200 odd years, the voting here. You go to the polling person, your name, where you live, and so on, and then you will sign on their system, and there's a matching signature of the voter there. So immediately the signature is matched to the voter. The simple thing like that, why don't we have that in Guyana?
That's a possibility, but I maintain that given the problems we are faced with, the most unique form of identification, the most particularized form of identification that's available to us is the fingerprint, and that's the way I would go.
And I agree with you. I agree. Whatever system we put in place must make the system better. And fingerprinting is good. People use the eye, the eye authentication and so on. So there's so many things you can use. But I'm surprised, Mr. Alexander, that you being a commissioner 15 odd years, and we don't have a signature. The presiding officer don't have the signatures of the voter. So when they come in to sign to receive their ballot, no matching signature.
Well, two things. I don't think a signature is that unique a form of identification, on one hand. On the other hand, there are very many voters who do not use signatures. They use their thumbprints.
Right.
So that, in fact, the universally available identifier in the circumstance would more be the fingerprints than a signature.
Okay.
Because already you have people who do not sign.
Yeah, and I agree. I think a lot of Guyanese agree that fingerprinting is that biometric is an important part of the process. Now, Mr. Alexander, you mentioned 47 boxes before Dr. Rose come on the East Coast. And there were like 14,000 votes, you said?
Approximately, yes.
How many votes you think was not valid in the 2020 election?
I would not venture a guess on the matter. Suffice to say that the documentation produced out of the recount that was to be verified seemed to suggest that there were about 4,000 to 5,000 such claims.
Was that enough to overturn the election?
4,000 to 5,000?
Yeah.
Thereabout, yes.
But don't forget, it wouldn't be votes for one party. It can be vote for all the parties. So if it's based on proportion of votes received, then it means the PEP would have got like 3,000 less. The PNC would have got about 2,000 less.
In the electoral system, as far as I know, the best practice is that if you have a sufficient number, irrespective of the proportionality of both castes or parties, if you have a sufficient number that can make a difference, then that is factored in as the basis for nullifying those results.
But your statement, Mr. Alexander, is actually telling us that the votes that is not valid was cast for one party only, not both parties.
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that in an electoral system, if you have a sufficient number of votes that can make a difference, one way or the other.
I know, but in this last election, in this last 2020 election,
that's the best practice.
Yeah, the PP got like 7,000 votes more than the combined opposition. But if 5,000 vote was invalid, as you're saying, that would have split among all the parties. It wouldn't be one party.
I have no doubt about that as conjecture. To whom the votes would have belonged is a matter of conjecture. What the practice has been, simple, once you have a sufficient number of votes that are controversial, irrespective of what the proportionality of the other votes might be, it is used as the basis for a nullification of the result in a particular place.
Okay, and we'll come to the what is before the courts later on in the program. But based on what happened on the recount and everything else, it seems very clear that the PPP won the election hands down. At least they got the most votes, and they got the presidency.
There was a recount. It was a legal recount. And for all intents and purposes, the body authorized to determine the results. GCOM determined that the PPP had won.
Okay,
I
Dr.
have a
Rose.
slightly different view in the matter. I feel that notwithstanding the fact that the question of contested elections is a question for a petition, that provision did not envisage a recount that would get us to the point that we got to. That when you get to that point, irrespective of the provisions for a petition, that we were in a position where we could have done a by-election for that particular part of the country. That's my view.
Dr. Rose.
Yes, good night again, Mr. Alexander, and welcome to the program. I want to go back to something here. Structurally, GCOM's structure is based on the former President of the United States, Jimmy Carter's formula, which dates back to 1992. And in that structure, you have a chairperson who is constitutionally appointed, meaning that no government can move that individual. And you have 6 commissioners, 3 from each of the 2 major parties. And they're also constitutionally appointed and cannot be removed. So any voting could lead to a tie with the commissioner breaking the tie vote. My question to you is this. I want you to tell our listeners the role/function of the chair and each of the commissioners from each party.
Well, let's look at it this way. The position of commissioner, including the chair, is a constitutional position. Ideally and classically, those persons should be objective and should therefore exercise their minds and their vote based on an objective determination of the matter. That's ideally what should occur. I think there is sufficient evidence in the public domain to suggest that that does not necessarily occur. And more particularly, in recent times, one can predict an outcome of any issue in terms of what positions commissioners will take. And unfortunately, one can even predict now what position the chairperson would take. So that we have a system which is obviously far removed from what was intended. It is therefore a system that is, for all intents and purposes, dysfunctional.
Okay. You did mention just now that the commissioners should be objective. How many times, in your opinion, were commissioners from either side objective? A rough estimate.
I would say that under the chairmanship of Suraj Bali, that there were many times when commissioners behaved as commissioners on issues. I would like to point to Commissioner Moem Magdoum. In 2011, when the dispute arose about the results being produced by Boudou, and Boudou contested the challenge. He did not concede that he had done anything wrong. He contested it. We had to go to the RUPA and to go through provision by provision to show him that he had done the wrong thing. So he then had no choice. It's like somebody found guilty, not somebody who said, look, I made a mistake. When he was, quote unquote, found guilty, the chairman, Suraj Bali, posed the question, what do we do in this circumstance? So the chairman didn't immediately say, well, let's do A, B, or C. He seemed to be uncertain as to what course of action should be taken. It is Commissioner Moe Magdoum, a commissioner who was nominated by the then government, who said to the chairperson, if what Mr. Alexander pinpointed is proven to be correct, we have no choice but to take the course of action to correct what Boodoo has presented to us. That is what, and so you saw a commissioner there who was very objective in circumstances where the stakes for the group that nominated him were extremely high. And so I think Magdoum has to be commended, and as for what he did on that occasion, even more than I should be commended for finding out the wrong that Boodoo had committed.
You're telling us that GCOM system is dysfunctional, which means, in other words, GCOM has a flawed system.
Let me clarify that. When I talk about the dysfunctionality, I'm not talking about the entire system. I'm talking about the level of the commission, the operation of the commission. That level of the system is dysfunctional.
And that's about the highest level of GCOM in the
Is the highest level. And if that level was not dysfunctional, what Mingo is accused of would not pass muster. Would not pass muster for a simple reason. Mingo's declaration was not a final declaration of the results of our elections. It was the declaration of a district. Those declarations are then brought to the commission for finalization. We as commissioners are supposed to be in possession of the same statements of poll that everyone else would have used to do the calculation. We are therefore in a position to determine what comes before us is correct or incorrect. And therefore, even if at the lower level attempts are made to corrupt the results, the commission is in a position to correct any such corruption and to make a declaration that is a true declaration reflecting the votes of the electorate. But with a fractured commission, one cannot guarantee that that kind of objectivity would prevail, and therefore commissioners may seek to perpetuate wrongdoing that might have occurred at a lower level. And therein lies the fault in our system. Other than that, even if there are problems at the lower level, the way in which the system is structured, those problems can be corrected in the manner in which we corrected Boodoo's attempt to produce a fraudulent result.
Did the commissioners have a time to deliberate on Mingo's statements or results?
That the commissioners, as far as I'm concerned, deprived themselves of that opportunity, because many commissioners took to the District 4 count rather than to maintain their position as recipients of statements of polls which they could authenticate and therefore be in a position to produce a final result. So when it came to the level of the commission, we, the commissioners, funny enough, had all of the statements of polls except for those that were controversial. Because as the controversy unfolded, we did not stay our course as recipients of those statements. We abandoned our positions, went to get involved in the district count, which is not a normal thing for commissioners to do, and therefore did not collect the statements for those polling stations, and could not therefore exercise the control that the commission could normally exercise if they are recipients of all the statements of poll.
Okay. You're saying that, so GCOM has a dysfunctional system, which is, in other words, is a flawed system today.
It is a flawed system because of the manner in which the commission is constituted in the context of the political culture of our country.
Okay. Now, my question to you, Mr. Alexander, and to all the commissioners out there, and to the chairperson, can you tell our listeners how can a flawed system conduct a fair and free election in Guyana in the upcoming local government elections?
A flawed system can hardly do that, but the nation at large and the leadership of the nation has to come to terms with that for the change to occur. The leadership of the nation has not come to terms with that and have maintained a flawed system. And as I said, GCOM is a microcosm of our society, and the leadership themselves are a part of that whole society of which GCOM is a microcosm, and may find themselves being equally a reflection of the way our society operates.
Given what happened in 2020 during the 5 months period, when we had this whole election debacle, the courts and everything else, what changes have GCOM made to prevent such happening again?
GCOM itself has made absolutely no change. GCOM refused, in my view, wrongly, to conduct a review of the system to see if there were things they could do to perfect the system. GCOM refused on a 4-3 vote on the pretext that the review of our system would lead us into the jurisdiction of the court. I disagree with that. A review of our system is normal. It had been done in the past and could have been the basis on which we could have identified areas in which we could have plugged the system. GCOM refused on a 4-3 vote to do that review.
The observation process has been postponed or delayed for another 14 days. Do you think we'll have local government elections in time for March? I think it's March 13th next year.
It will not occur. From the fact of the postponement of the nomination day, it follows that elections cannot be held as originally intended.
So when do you think elections will be held?
Sometime into the future. I have seen a proposal which suggests that they will try to hold it by the end of April. I cannot give a guarantee that that will fly, but that's the proposal on the table as I speak with you.
Did the chairperson, Ms. Claudette Singh, had any pronouncement on this?
On what? The postponement?
On the date? Yes.
I think at the end of the day, everyone agreed that there should be a postponement. At the end of the day, all of the commissioners agreed, including the chairperson, that there should be a postponement. That's one thing that was agreed to over time. It wasn't agreed to immediately. Initially, the thing that caused the postponement was being embraced by some. But eventually, with the CEO showing his hand in relation to his views about the court case, the commission was brought around to agreeing that there should be a postponement.
Agreed, but here is the question I want to ask you. The chairperson, as you said, also agree that there will be a postponement.
Yes.
Okay. My next question to you then. Given what has been revealed, what the chairperson said during the election, the Commission of Inquiry on the 2020, what happened there in the 5 months, my question to you is this. Do you think she's competent enough to remain the chairperson of GCOM?
That's not a valid question insofar as in the present configuration and conditions of the office, whether she's competent or not, there is no mechanism except her own conscience for her removal. I think that the chairperson has exhibited from time to time bias, not only a question of competency, but a question of bias, which suggests unsuitability for the office.
So indirectly, you're saying that she's incompetent.
I don't know that bias and incompetence is the same. I would say I would speak more to bias. And being biased sometimes doesn't require competency or doesn't reflect competency or incompetency.
Bias towards, against, who or what?
I think at this point in time, she's biased towards the ruling party.
And there's clear evidence to support that.
In my view, yes. I'll be prepared to argue the case.
Okay.
Let me go further in that. When we were to appoint a chief elections officer, the present appointee did not have the required years of service, of experience required to be appointed. But was yet appointed. And that had to come from, in my view, bias.
So you're saying the CEO is not qualified to hold that position?
The CEO, in my view, as I said then and I say now, did not have the required years of experience that GCOM said he should have. That they appointed him was out of contriving to say that he had experience.
What changes would you like to see? What changes would you like to see in GCOM to make it functional?
I would agree that we need to review the question of how our commission is constituted. And I think that we could look at the Jamaican model as a model we may want to adopt in some form or fashion.
But they don't have commissioners based on party. They have independent commissioners.
They do have commissioners based on party, but they have independent commissioners. So in a manner that the party commissioners cannot make a determination by their vote, by a block vote.
So you advocating the Jamaican system. Now,
we should look at that system as an example of what we may wish to have in Guyana.
Okay. Now, if we look at the Jamaican system carefully, they have a two-tier system in commissioners. I don't want to go into the details to confuse our audience. But the thing is, they will have a first vote based on party, and they will have a second vote where the independent commissioners can overrule what the party commissioners vote for or against. Don't you think that's a delaying of the process?
No, not necessarily. And if it delays the process, it's a worthy delay.
Okay.
The question of a vote, so, one vote and the next vote, it's not a matter of months, it's not a matter of weeks. At most, it could be a matter of days. It's not a significant delay in my view.
So you prefer to see us, we have two sets of voting. Okay, now go back to the CEO. He has been there for a number of months now. Can you tell our listeners what are his role/functions?
The CEO is the one who's responsible for the administration of elections, responsible for making propositions to the Commission in terms of the plans for the elections, and with approved plans, administering the process. That's the role of the CEO.
Should the CEO be a political appointee?
No, definitely not.
But we have seen political appointees as CEO from both parties.
I can't, well, that's a good question. I do not think that one could contest the appointment of previous CEOs in the manner in which one can contest the appointment of the present CEO. Though we may conclude that CEOs turned out to be favoring one or the other party, I think prior to the appointment of this CEO, that at the time of appointment, the question of party loyalty was not contested with the other CEOs at the time of appointment.
So you're saying Mr. Lowenfield was not politically appointed?
No, not to my knowledge.
Who appointed him?
Mr. Lowenfield's appointment was unanimous. There's nobody objected to it.
The PB did not object?
No.
No objection from the commissioners?
No.
Okay. Charles?
Mr. Alexander, let's go back a little where you said. Are you following the commission of inquiry that is going on right now with the 2020 election?
In between.
Okay. You mentioned the Dr. Rose question that the commissioner is not obligated to accept the result of the returning officer in Region 4, in this case, Mr. Mingo. Was Mr. Mingo obligated to produce accurate results? Why do we have
I would say yes.
Did he?
I would prefer not to comment on that question.
Okay.
I prefer not to comment on that question.
Okay.
The matter is before the court in two forms. It's before the court in terms of Mingo being charged. It's before the court in terms of the petition. And so in that circumstance, I would prefer not to comment on that matter.
Okay, that's a fair statement.
I'd like to say that GCOM prevailed, albeit late, in producing a result that did not, that affected the thinking of the commission in terms of a recount, except for the controversy in relation to the same area that was controversial in relation to Mingo.
When the chairman spoke at the COI, but let me ask you first: Are you gonna give evidence in front of the COI?
Only if subpoenaed.
Okay. When the chairman gave her statement there, she said she was afraid for her life, which I guess human nature, we're afraid when things go bad. Did she call any emergency meeting with the commissioner the day when there was report that Mr. Mingo was not reading out the result from the statement of polls, but on a spreadsheet? Did she call an emergency meeting?
The day when the chairperson said she was nervous and all of that, the commission was in session. The commission was in session seeking to address the very question, the spreadsheet, etc. While we were in session, what nobody has said, the Canadian High Commissioner barged in. People are saying that somebody knocked on the door and all of that. She barged in a boisterous manner and disrupted the meeting, the Canadian High Commissioner. It is when she disrupted the meeting that commissioners rushed out, some of them joining her in a boisterous manner about what Mingo was doing. And the chairman then proceeded up the stairs into the secluded area. The reaction.
So let's stop there, Mr. Alexander. What was the meeting about when you had that commission meeting going on?
The issues were being raised about the conduct of the count.
What are some of the issues?
The same question as to whether he was correct to use a spreadsheet as opposed to the actual statements of polls, etc.
But you mentioned earlier that all the commissioner had all the statements of poll except the 47 boxes. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So you would have known that the statement of polls had X amount of vote for the different parties, except
That's
the 47.
That's
so
correct.
What was the big issue about then?
In terms of what? The big issue was
why this hullabaloo when you know you have all the statement of polls, all the commissioners have all the statement of poll except 47?
If you don't have the 47, then your count is incomplete.
I know, but so the 47 is the issue right now at the meeting.
In both instances, the 47 pertained to the Mingo's questionable count, and the 47 pertained to the unauthenticated.
Right. So did you subsequently receive the statement of polls for those 47?
We never received them. They were never authenticated by us and never received.
So who have those statement of polls?
I would presume that they are somewhere in GCOM. But those statements in some regards became irrelevant. All became irrelevant once we agreed to recount.
But well, that's a statement
Those statement of polls were not authenticated by the commissioners. They were not, therefore, finalized for the purpose of determining the count. We agreed to a recount. Having we agreed to a recount, all of those statements of polls became irrelevant.
No, I agree with that, Mr. Alexander, but based on your analysis of the election, with all the statement of polls that you had in your possession, did it reflect the result of what was published outside the 47?
My answer would be no.
It didn't. Okay.
No.
I want to also bring you back to when Mr. Patterson was chairman. He made some decisions there that was also supported only by the coalition commissioner. And I didn't hear you say that those were biased decisions.
I said two things. I said that the commission is a reflection of the microcosm of the society. I would go on to argue that we should go to those decisions one at a time in the determination of whether they were biased or not. I did not see myself as being involved in a biased manner in decision making. The fundamental decisions that were made under Patterson, one was the appointment of the DCEO. The person who was appointed, in my view, had superior qualifications for the job. The system we used for interviewing and scoring, that too is a dysfunctional system. So that is one instance where one could look to see if commissioners were.
But who are the persons responsible for the scoring when they interviewed the DCEO?
Huh? The commissioners.
So the 6 commissioners?
And the chairperson.
And the chairperson. So each one had their list.
But at the end of the day, yes, each one had their list. But people simply, you could imagine that people scored under some of the items 100%.
That's possible.
Well, I suppose it's possible, but in the circumstance, I found it strange.
So in that interview,
let me say this to you. It is in the circumstance of that kind of problem that we suggested that GCOM should recruit a professional team of human resource persons to conduct the interviews and to make a recommendation, rather than to have the commission, which had the right to, to be involved in the interviews. That approach was turned down.
Who turned it down?
The 3 commissioners nominated by the government.
No, but the chairman would have ruled over that.
Yes, the chairman also participated. And I'm speaking to the current chairperson.
No. When you interviewed for the DCO, when Ms. Myers
coming out of those interviews, in the next dispensation, we made a recommendation that would have changed the system and removed the possibility of people saying that the commissioners were biased.
Okay, so and this might help us to understand that in the interview sheet that you and the other 2 coalition commissioners had, your score sheet had more marks from Ms. Myers as against the opposition then commissioners who had more marks for the other person. Is that correct or that's not correct?
That is correct.
Wasn't that bias on both sides, that you were biased for Myers and they were biased for the next person?
Well, I don't think if I was biased for Myers, I'd have given her 100. I didn't.
We complained, Mr. Alexander, about the GCOM, and GCOM is so bad. Why don't the commissioners resign to start with?
That doesn't solve the problem.
In protests are going on. If you resign?
2 things. I am raising the issue about the commission. I'm not speaking on behalf of all of the commissioners. So there's no situation where you will get a block 100% resignation.
Because every time we talk to any commissioner of GCOM, the same problem. They have this animosity and, among, well, it doesn't appear that in the public, but at meetings, what you're telling us here is that there's a lot of biasness in meeting. And
they will not all tell you what I'm telling you here.
Okay. One time we had one of your opposite commissioner, and I asked him a question. I want to ask you the same question. Have you ever supported any recommendation that was put forward by the other 3 commissioners that is not on your side?
Yes.
Can you name some of them?
Now, first of all, let's deal with periods. Whilst I might not be able to recall specifically, there were many instances prior to the present regime where there were commonality of views by commissioners. So in those circumstances, there were issues I put forward that might have been supported. There were issues that they put forward that might have been supported. I would say very recent, trying to remember the issue, but there was an issue put forward, very recent by a commissioner nominated by the government that I concurred with.
And what was that recommendation?
I concurred with something said by Commissioner Rui a few days ago.
Was that for a vote or just a discussion?
It was a matter on which a decision was required.
And you want to care what matter it was? To say
concur. That particular one had to do with the need for us to accelerate the recruitment process. There's been slothfulness in the recruitment process for officers that I think is impacting the quality of work that we're putting out. And there's been a reluctance on the part of many to accelerate that process. And I must confess in that regard, that there was a coincidental view, not among all commissioners, but between my own disposition and Commissioner Rui, and I dare say the other commissioners nominated by the government, by the opposition.
So there's very little support either side of the aisle give to each other on matters that is important for the Elections Commission. How then, Mr. Alexander, can we have a functional commission?
That's why I said it's dysfunctional.
And that's why I'm asking you, why don't the commissioners start the first step by resigning in protest?
Well, if I resign in protest, I don't know that that will change anything.
You will be an outstanding son, at least certain principle.
Resign in protest, and then you leave a commission that, on one hand, cannot do simple things because of, well, that can do simple things without my presence, and continue the folly.
You think we should have a CEO that is non-Guyanese?
I do not think we should have a CEO that is non-Guyanese as an absolute disposition. But I did think on the last occasion that there was a non-Guyanese CEO who was more qualified than the current CEO. And in addition to being more qualified, I did share the view that being a foreigner might have brought a different disposition to the work of GCOM.
Should we have a CEO that is neither of African or Indian descent, of Guyanese? Who's Guyanese?
I don't, I wouldn't support that. I don't see the nature of our society.
But you said it, Mr. Alexander. You said Mr. Bodu was leaning biased towards the PP, and we think Mr. Lowenfield was biased towards the PNC. So these are examples that's before us. So why don't we have a CEO that is neither African or Indian origin?
What difference would that make?
Put an Amerindian, maybe.
Well, I almost mentioned where we've ended up with the deputy speaker, but I don't want to go there.
Dr. Rose?
Mr. Alexander, I want to go back to local government elections. Do you think GCOM will be ready by next year to conduct
GCOM
local government?
GCOM, outside of the issues of the quote-unquote bloated list, can be ready this year.
This bloated list you is speaking about has been there since 2015. It was there in 2020. It's there now. How can we get rid of it?
There are difficulties in terms of getting rid of that list, given the ruling of Justice George. To get rid of that list in terms of creating a new list would require consensus among the parties for parliamentary action. It is against that background that I feel if we are honest about having an election that's free and fair, that we should go the route of biometrics to reduce the possibility, hopefully to zero, of duplicate voting.
But can GCOM agree among all the commissioners and the chair said, look, it's embarrassing to know that this country has 790,000 people and we have a list of 682,000. We are going to scrap this list and go house to house for registration. GCOM has the power to do that, don't GCOM?
Things, Dr. Rose. We can't do that because it would fly in the face of the judgment. And therefore, the matter of being able to do house to house, and lots of people have a misunderstanding of the significance of house to house, and I'll get to that just now. But given the judgment, GCOM as a commission can no longer scrap the list. We are stuck with that until the question of residency and those issues are resolved. And those are not issues GCOM can itself resolve, although we can make recommendations for the resolution. And that is why I would, in the circumstance, try to be very practical in my approach and do something that does not remove those names from the list, since we can do that, but eliminate the possibility of the persons being voted for. This question of house-to-house registration is something that was legislated for. But the fact of the matter is that GCOM can create a new list using either house-to-house registration or office-based registration. The advantage of house-to-house registration is that you're likely to provide a greater opportunity to the citizens to be registered, as opposed to them coming to an office to be registered. But the house-to-house registration is no different from a office-based registration in terms of trying to capture everyone who is entitled to vote.
Okay. Now, in this local government election, I think we'll have 10 municipalities: Anna Regina, Lethem, Mabaruma, Madhya, Bartica, Linden, Georgetown, New Amsterdam, Rosalton, and Corriverton. But in 10 municipalities, among the 10 regions, 3 of those municipalities are in Region 6. Georgetown being the largest region, almost 2.25 times the population of Region 6, has only 1. Does GCOM has the apparatus to function competently for local government elections in the system like in Region 6, where you have more NDCs than in Region 4 and more municipalities than in Region 4?
GCOM has conducted local government elections in the past under those conditions. And so it suggests that GCOM does have the capacity to do so. It did it in 2016, 2018. My only concern in relation to GCOM in that regard is that with the recent legislation and the draconian fines for strict liability offenses, the GCOM will not be able to attract the quality, the quantity, and quality of staff required. So I think we have put a burden on GCOM by virtue of the proposed amendments, because they're not yet assented to LUPA. People of certain standing will not take a job where if you make a mistake, you can be jailed or fined. And so we're going to get less people of quality applying for those jobs. And so though in 2016 and 2018, we successfully conducted those elections, we are faced with a challenge in 2020. And in fact, that has come to our attention already, because in the course of appointing the staff, there was an instance where a particular party objected to 72 persons being appointed, claiming they were politically biased. The CEO's response to that was, well, I don't know their bias, but if I don't have those 72 persons, I'll be forced to appoint persons who are of lesser quality than the ones I presently appointed. I'll be forced to have to move people from out of their homesteads into other areas because the areas have not thrown up a sufficient number of persons. So my contention is we're already confronted with the problem of the quantity and quality of staff based on the laws we have passed, which seek to penalize electoral officials in a draconian manner, not on the probability of them committing an offense, on strict liability. It means if somebody exercises bad judgment in relation to allowing somebody, not allowing somebody to vote, once you exercise that bad judgment, you're guilty. It's not a question of whether you thought wrong or acted negligently. No, you're simply guilty and you'll be fined and or in prison. Who's going to go and take a job of that nature?
Several media outlets have reported that some municipalities have been withdrawn to accommodate a certain party or parties more votes. But GCOM, I was made to understand from the same media reports, has overruled that. Where we stand on that right now?
Let's give clarity to that. The laws of Guyana provides for the minister responsible for local government to pronounce on the boundaries of local government areas. And therefore, the minister would have had the authority to pronounce on an extension of the boundary of Mapaluma, on a redrawing of the boundaries of the local authorities, was formerly 52 to 74, which will now be 2 local authorities, on the boundaries of Haruni Yarokabra and Lamaha Yarokabra, which boundaries have been reconfigured. The minister can do that and has done that. However, having redrawn the boundaries for the local government area and having pronounced on the number of constituencies in those areas, it is not the minister's prerogative or jurisdiction to configure the constituencies. Those constituencies within the local government area have to be configured by GCOM. What has occurred is that the minister has sought to reconfigure constituencies in those areas where he has reconfigured the external boundaries of the local government areas. GCOM has agreed that the minister has no such authority. GCOM, in a statement released by GCOM, and presumably from the office of the chairperson, has in some regards obfuscated the issue by suggesting that the minister may have reconfigured constituencies. And I say obfuscate for this reason, that if one examines Order 40 and Order 50 of 2022, both of which are under the nomenclature of constituencies, one would see that the minister has sought to reconfigure constituencies. And therefore, GCOM cannot, with the knowledge it has of those orders, say that he may have. He has. Further to that, if one reviews the lists that GCOM had published, one could see that GCOM had used the unlawful reconfiguration to publish those lists. And therefore, GCOM had acted wrongfully in that regard. So whilst on one hand, GCOM has come to the conclusion, after a long process where others felt initially that the minister could in fact draw constituency lines, that was argued by the commissioners, the government commissioners. They prepared a legal submission in that regard. That legal submission has been counteracted by another submission and the chairman's concurrence that GCOM is responsible. But beyond that, GCOM is complicit because it has sought in its release to suggest that they don't have knowledge of what I will contend they have knowledge of, because the orders clearly indicate what the minister sought to do. And GCOM itself used the boundaries provided in those to provide for the lists. However, there is scope for that to be undone because those lists, given the postponement and the reason for the postponement of nominations day, will not be the lists which will be used.
Based on the People's Representation Act Mr. Commissioner, every polling station, after the polls are closed and the votes are counted, that the results should be posted outside of each polling station. Given that all the regions and all the polling stations can actually count the votes maybe a few hours after the polls have closed, and we should at least get the results by midnight, the latest. Why does it take so long for us to get results? 2, 3, 4 days. Even though it's in the interior, they can count the results. They can take a cell phone, take a snapshot of it, and send the results down to Georgetown. So that you get a snap. You don't have to wait for the statement of polls to come because you have it in front of you from a snapshot. Why is it taking so long for us to get results in Guyana?
Two things. You cannot treat with the local government results in the same manner that you treat with national results. In the case of local government, the results are for 80 elections rather than one. And so the results are localized. And even in the localized results, in each LGA, there's a result for constituency. So that there's no process of trying to bring things together. And so in local government, one can much easily get results because the results are being compiled simultaneously in 80 places, and there is no process of bringing them together to get a district result, so to speak. A local government result is a local government result. So one needs to bear that in mind, and that should provide for a much quicker declaration of results than at the national level. At the national level, we have to get 10 results. Those 10 results requires that, for example, in the hinterland, after 6 o'clock, you've got to find a way to move results from the remote areas to the center of the district. So for example, in region 7, you have to find a way to move results from Camarang, from the Mazaruni, etc., to Bartica before you have a declaration of that district. Similarly, in the Rupununi, going way down to the New River area, you have to find a way to move those results, and that cannot be done overnight because you cannot move by air overnight. You also can't move very often by river overnight. You don't have the kind of communication that you talked about to get those results in, and so that takes time. Suffice to say that the issue of what's up in results, I think that we don't have the level of trust in our system to have people accept that mechanism as the basis for the transmission of results.
Mr. Alexander, GCOM, from my understanding, do have a polling agent, a presiding officer, and polling clerks at each station. If the results are counted and signed by all the party agents there, and that is sent to Georgetown, what discrepancy that could cause? All the party agents sign the results, their signatures will be there.
Sent to Georgetown,
and when you talk about
by
communication,
WhatsApp?
Cell phones, yes, you can put data system in your data in your cell phone, and you can do it. You don't need towers to do it. You can put it data system in your cell phone and send it down to Georgetown.
Let me respond to you this way. I was employed as the returning officer for the elections of the People's National Congress. I used that mechanism. In fact, I used that mechanism even to be able to enter a polling station via a video WhatsApp, see what was happening. Having said that, however, a system to be used has to be a system accepted by the stakeholders. I do not think we're at the point where the stakeholders will accept that. For example, we have looked at the possibility of the transmission of results electronically. It has not been embraced. I used a system of electronic transmission for UG results in the the early 2000s. I actually used the electronic system, which was at the disposal at GCOM. It was not embraced, but we used it for UG results, right? And it worked for us at that time. So you have a problem of what the stakeholders are prepared to embrace. But having said that, notwithstanding what you have said, I do not think that we do have the kind of reach in terms of our digital or virtual communication for that to occur from every polling station in Guyana.
Mr. Alexander, I traveled the length and breadth of this country last year and this year. And in every district I went in the most remote areas, there's television there, local channels, radio station broadcast there.
How have been to the most remote areas?
Radios are being...
not been to the most remote areas. There are areas. I have traveled in the country.
Radios are being broadcast. Radio station broadcasting from those areas. So the radio station can... I don't know of any area. I don't know of any area the radio station is not broadcasting from. Name me one area that is not a radio station. Can you?
One area?
Yeah, where there is not a radio station.
I don't know the YYs get radio station.
Well, I'm saying to you, I have traveled, and all the areas I've been to, there are radio stations broadcasting. So they can broadcast the results.
Now you moved to radio stations, and we weren't talking about that earlier. But even in the instance of radio stations,
but I'm saying it's in the means of communication. If you don't want to be transmitted electronically, then the radio station can broadcast. In the United States, the parties don't have to agree for any station to broadcast the results. CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, they announce the results. This person won in this, that senator won, that congressman won, and so forth. And they broadcast the results. The parties don't have to agree with
quite different. As a matter of political culture, it's quite different.
No, but the radio stations are independent, and they can broadcast the results.
The culture is vastly different in those countries.
No, I'm saying the radio stations I'm talking about are not owned by government. They're independent. They can broadcast the results
across this country. The radio stations that broadcast across this country are the state-owned radio stations.
I'm in areas where they're local radio stations.
It's totally feasible as yet in Guyana. I think what is feasible is to have mechanisms for checking fingerprints, and so that's relatively feasible because of the nature of those machines with power packs, etc.
I'm not going to get dodgy in the semantics anymore, but I'm saying to you, it should not take us 3-4 days to get results in Guyana. This means that GCOM is not doing his job. GCOM has to find a way to get the results from the remote areas one way or the other and broadcast it. That's not rocket science.
I would concede that GCOM ought to do better, but I don't think that you have necessarily put your pulse on the answer.
Mr. Alexander, you seems to be contradicting yourself there, because on the one hand, you're saying that you want the fingerprint to be done, and that must be done digital, because without that, but then you're saying that system cannot work to get the result in, as Dr. Rose is saying. So how can it work one way and not work the other way?
You will have to have standalone systems in every polling station with a power pack, right? Nothing is being transmitted. In the instance of results, you have to transmit. And I'm saying,
so in that same computer,
you do not have the virtual reach to transmit.
Mr. Alexander, you're saying that the commission cannot agree to these things. It seems as though you're the one, your part, don't want to agree to the transmission of electronic information.
I am saying I would agree in principle, but I'm saying that I do not know that we have what it takes at this point in time.
It's not rocket science, Mr. Alexander.
I'm not saying it's rocket science. So I agree in principle. I agree in principle.
Okay. Last week we had Mr. Gentleman Barbies on our program, and he spoke of independent councillors that can contest the local government election. Mr. Harbajan. He said he is doing his work in Barbies, but GCOM is not pushing that scenario to the electorate. Is that correct?
GCOM has been negligent in its civic and voter education. GCOM does not have a civic and voter education manager. It does not have a deputy chief elections officer, and it's not doing all that should be done. And the councillor, Mr. Harbajan, is quite correct. GCOM can do much more in terms of civic and voter education that will let the voters know that individuals can run as candidates in constituencies.
Is it likely that will change before the nomination day?
We're hoping so. We have struggled, and at least we have now gotten the list of candidates for that position, and we hope that we can proceed to have that person appointed.
Because for someone to run independent, they have to get signatures of the electorate in their community and so on, and submit all those things to
they have to have the knowledge that they can run independent in the first instance.
Yeah. We mentioned the new law that the government has passed, and you say it's not yet assented by the president. But Mr. Alexander, isn't the law meant to get rid of any bad apples you might have in the system? And I'm not saying that facetiously, because I think all of our presiding officers are people of honor, because I don't think any of presiding officers have done anything that is incorrect throughout Guyana. So
I can't say I know that.
Okay, so isn't this law trying to prevent anyone who want to not work with the law that GCOM said this is the law?
For me, the changes in the law have not addressed the critical issues, critical flaws in our system.
But what are some of the critical areas that you think it should address?
Well, for example, I am saying that the law should address the question of biometrics.
Okay, what else?
The question of biometrics removes the control of individuals over certain things, which seems to have gone wrong in the last elections.
Right, so, but this law now tell the presiding officer, if you allow anyone who's not supposed to vote, you commit an offense. That is straightforward.
Yes.
Isn't that what you would support?
I would support that. Suffice to say that you have given one example. There are other examples of the offenses. There is the question of enforcement. There's a question of enforcement. Boudou, on 2 occasions, on one occasion actually committed a fraud. The next occasion sought to do so. And the law took no action against him.
Well, now this new law will.
I don't know. The point I'm making is that the law could have at that time as well. The law is enforced by individuals. And a system could well be in place, but if you don't have the enforcers, and if there's bias even in the point of enforcement, then what does the law mean?
Yeah, but I think also the political parties will also train their agent to ensure they understand the law as well. So if a presiding officer acts contrary to the law, they can bring it up. Now, this law might also bring out the best presiding officers that a country might ever have, because everyone works. We don't know that yet, but we'll see.
We will see, but my argument is that if you were saying they may bring out the best performance, but if you don't have the best quality of officers, then you may have a problem with the best performance.
I think it might bring out the best officers as well. Now, what is your view of breaking up region 3, 4, and 6 into different sub-regions?
There is no, I see no particular reason for the course of action. In fact, my argument is that that course of action is more required in the hinterland, so we can get, and I'm getting back to the point Dr. Rose was making, so we can get direct transmission of results from locations in the hinterland rather than to have to get them via a central spot.
Which region would you identify for that?
That is relevant to region 9, for example. It is relevant to region 8. It's relevant to region 7 and to region 1. So, for example, region 1, you can get a result from the Kaituma, Matthews area. You can get a result from the Maburuman area, and you can get a result from the Maruku area. Presently, they all have to send the results to Maburuman.
Did you had and that's I think I support that too. And most guys would support the more controls you have, the better it is. Did you have a chance to make recommendation to the government for those regions? Did GCOM have any input into that new law?
GCOM was invited. GCOM failed internally to settle on any matter to make recommendations for the electoral reform.
I'm coming back to the same question, Alexander. I think all 6 commissioners should resign in protest because we're not getting nowhere. The other thing this new law put in place is that, as Dr. Rose mentioned, not only is it stepping the polls outside the polling station, but now they have to also send it electronically to a central body.
I never had a problem with that. In 2011, that proposition was made that the results should be broadcast and televised based on the statements of poll as they became available. And we have to still ask Boudou and the chairman at that time why they did not move in that direction.
But I think this law now that was recently passed do put that in place, that everyone will see the result online.
I have no problem with that. I can have no problem with that.
And everyone will see the results and nobody can say, hey, we don't know what the polling result is. Mr. Alexander, we are coming to the end of our program. I know Dr. Rose have a lot more questions. I do have a lot more, but time is running out on us.
Can I just jump in and say this?
Yes.
Mr. Alexander, with all due respect, the chairperson, the CEO, and all the commissioners, I think, are still in terms of technology, are in the 18th or 19th century. Technology exists today to do anything that GCOM wants to do. So tell the chair to go out and get those technology. If you need recommendation from anybody to provide you the technology to get results, I have a number of people I can recommend, and they will get the technology. You can get the results, polls close, the votes are counted, get the results to Georgetown instantly. The technology is there. Let's not kid ourselves about this. But if you all want to remain in the 20th century, 19th century, that's okay. But 21st century technology is there. If people can go to the moon, then I can't see why GCOM can't do this. So what you're telling me, but GCOM, we can't do it. No, you don't need consensus from no party. You broadcast the results as it comes in. And the technology is there to do that. That's my point to you.
For me, the more critical issue is ensuring that we do not have duplicate voting. And in that regard, the technology is available. It's been tried in other places. And for the name of heavens, I haven't been able to get GCOM to agree that we should go full force ahead in that regard.
Because you're all in the 20th century in terms of technology.
I'm certainly not there in the 20th century in that regard.
And this is the problem with institutions. They hold back progress. So the country can go forward. Jamaica has 3 million people. Trinidad has 1.6, 1.7. And with polls closed 4 hours after they can tell you who won the election. And Guyana, a week after, they still can't tell you.
Suffice to say that Jamaica and all those other places do not have the same political, cultural problems that Guyana has. And therefore, the solution to our problem does not merely reside in attempting to use technology. In fact, because of the problem we have, technology has not been accessed. And so Guyana needs to be able to deal with the issue of our political culture as the basis for moving things forward.
And that will be, and that, Mr. Alexander, will be another 100 years from now. So
we are who we are.
Apple sells the pen, can take all the results by just snapping at it and send it to any place you want it to go.
Mr. Alexander, we have come to the end of our program tonight, so we want to thank you. Anything in closing?
I just wish to say that we do have problems in terms of the functionality of GCOM, that the functionality of GCOM's problems is a reflection of the wider societal problems, and we're not going to have solutions in GCOM if we do not, as a nation, address our national dysfunctionalities, one of which is our political culture, which is an inhibitor to progress.
And the first thing, of course, is to change the composition of the commissioner. Let us have one commissioner from both parties, or 2 parties, or 3 parties, and the rest of it should be independent. That will
I don't know that that's the first thing, but it is desirable.
That will be immediately, that will bring solution, Mr. Alexander. I can promise you that. Dr. Rose, anything in closing?
Yes, again, I'll be calling for the retirement age to be increased from 55 to 62 to match the rest of the Caribbean. I will also call for increase of salaries for teachers, nurses, police officers, public servants. As you said, Charles, to $200,000 a month, but I'll say 150 as a good start. I'm also calling for a better internet system in the country. Better internet system in the country. And an end to blackouts, because it's happening rampantly. I'm up in the quarantine, and blackouts is happening every 2 hours. Every 2 hours we're having blackouts during the day and at nights as well. You wake up with blackout, you go to sleep with a blackout. I don't know when we're going to be blacking in, but we're having blackouts. So I'm saying these things can be solved if the authorities take the right action. Why are we still having blackouts after more than 55 years of independence?
Okay, that's a different discussion. All right. On behalf of Globespan24x7, Dr. Rose, and all of our guests over this past year, we want to wish all our viewers, everyone out there, all of Guyana and around the world who listen to us, a very, very Merry Christmas and a very exciting and happy 2023. We pray that 2023 will bring you good tidings. Be good to your fellow men, be good to each other, and good will definitely follow you. So all good wishes to everyone. Enjoy yourself. Don't drink too much. Don't drive on the road drunk. Please do not drink and drive. Be careful on the road. Avoid accident. Live to see 2023. And we wish you again a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to all of our viewers.
May I join with you in extending those wishes?
Thank you, Mr. Alexander, for coming on. You have been a good sport, but we didn't beat up on you, right?